Um, we were in the De La Salle high school, recently, and we were speaking to a class of young men. I think we were about 17-year-old, and talking to them about my own conversion and my life and my vocation to the priesthood and what have you. And then one of them asked about that, what's in his heart and in his mind. And he says, "And why can't you have a wife? Why can't you have a woman?" And obviously that's what moves them. That's what's, let's say, moves their whole life. Anyway, I explained to him, and it had me thinking upon basically what we're listening today in these last few days. In the time of eating, we have what we call spiritual reading, and at this moment we're going through the life of St Ignactus of Loyola. St Ignactus of Loyola, he formed the spiritual exercises, and part of the spiritual exercises is spiritual discernment, about discerning between God's voice and other voices, the voice of the evil spirits and worldly voices and the voice of the flesh, and to discern which is the right path to take, which obviously is the voice of the good spirit. And there are 14 rules that he makes in the discernment of spirits for the first week of the spiritual exercises. And the very first rule is this. He says, "In the persons who go from mortal sin to mortal sin, the enemy, the devil, is commonly used to propose to them apparent pleasures, making them imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and make them grow in their vices and sins." So that is basically what I would say is acting in the life of those young people who are living, let's say, far from God. They're not practicing the faith. They're living according to their sensual pleasures, their sensual passions, to get out pleasures in their life. And the devil holds them in this way of life because he holds up to them apparent pleasures, making them imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and more and make them grow in their vices. He enslaves them. But that's what he does to us as well, even though we associate that more with the youth. But he holds us as well, the devil, inflaming us, within us, pleasures, apparent pleasures or delights or commodities or comforts, in order to hold us back and to impede us to grow in our own faith. That's what the devil does. And he's very astute, and he does it in a very subtle way, and it impedes us from growing closer to God. Because it doesn't matter if the bird, as St John of the Cross says, is held by a thick cord or by a thin thread, it still can't fly. And so these thin threads that we might be held back by whatever attachment it might be that we have in our heart, could be attachment to whatever, it's still impeding us from being free to let's say, fly in our spiritual life, to communion with God. And that's what this time of Lent is about, discerning where we are being held back in our own lives and to put into practice the acts of penance which the Church asks us to put more into practice in an intensive way in this time of Lent in preparation for a deeper encounter with the risen Lord. Prayer, almsgiving, and fasting and abstinence. So just to finish off the first rule, and with that we'll finish. He says, St Ignatius, in this same first rule, there's a second half to that first rule. In these persons, the good spirit uses the opposite method to what the devil uses. He uses the method of pricking them and biting their consciences through the process of reason. So each one of us, through the process of reason, we know where we are being held back if we are deadly honest with ourselves. So we can ask now in this Mass that not just for ourselves, but to all the people, that God may enlighten us in truth to see where we are being held back by our disordered passions and delights, and which are holding us back in our spiritual growth and communion with Him. May Our Lady help us to walk by that way of spiritual freedom. Amen.